When I say I don't mean personally. I had a system,
Yeah.
thousands of guys that did these things.
So it's a very small window or group of people who could have ordered that even in the air.
Yeah, that's right. It
Yes.
was very. There was something about somebody that was able to make the phone call that said go, and the guys in the field had no way to cross-check it, and the plane went. So there it was.
So could it have been? So it wasn't. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't this the event that stopped the summit meeting, right?
The summit
Between
conference, yeah. Oh, it very definitely was timed to the summit conference, because had that, at that time, if you read, just look at the newspapers before May 1st of 60, you'll see that this coming summit conference was drawing columns by reputable writers that there was going to be a detente between the old war buddies, Khrushchev and Eisenhower, who during World War II were allies, and that they were sort of had the same desire for peace in the world and so on, and that this was going to be their last big deal. And
So it sounds to me like it's more of this high cabal kind of thing, not wanting there to be peace.
exactly,
Essentially.
yeah, exactly. And the timing is the clue,
Right.
because it's just like in Kennedy's assassination, the release of his plans for Vietnam, take all Americans out, cost him his life. That and the fact that he was definitely going to be reelected, so they would have no chance to recapitulate the things that he was ordering. So that's another thing that writers ought to be smart enough to do, is there is a very fine book, the Foreign Relations of the U.S. Volume 4, Vietnam, for the period August of 63 to December 63. It centers right in on those few months. And in it, it has, I think, 26 meetings in the White House by top people in the government on the Vietnam situation. They didn't bring in the Department of Commerce and all that stuff. Talking about Kennedy's plan. They were developing Kennedy's plans right there with Kennedy. They named the people that were there every time. My boss was there at most of the meetings. When he wasn't there, he was out in Vietnam getting some information that they wanted, then came right back again.
Is that Krulak?
Krulak.
Yeah.
And all this is you can get on. I got it on a bookshelf upstairs. Anybody can walk in a government print office and get it. And there's Kennedy's plans for Vietnam that positively say take the 1,000 men out as a token by the end of the year. We'll have everybody out by 65, and I'm not sending anybody into Vietnam. That cost him his life.
As well as a lot of other people.
It's just like the U-2 affair cost Eisenhower the chance to talk to Khrushchev and probably reach a détente. That's what his goal was. He had been working on Crusade for Peace.
Yeah,
He
right.
went to New Delhi, India. The biggest crowd ever assembled came to see him, and they planned to go to Moscow and have a bigger crowd there.
So what does somebody like Eisenhower do or think when that happens?
Oh, according,
Do you know?
yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
he has written a book, or part of a book. I forget just where I have the thing, that where he mentions that. He mentioned that Powers wasn't shot down. Eisenhower does. And from that time on, he was, he had a lot of heart attacks, and he was a very weak person, very weak man. And Nixon was almost running the government. Whenever there'd be meetings, say, for the Cuban anti-Castro program, which had nothing to do with Bay of Pigs, when Eisenhower approved it, it would always be Nixon handling the meetings. Eisenhower wouldn't be there. His last year or so, he was just a figurehead.
But did he write anything then, saying what his opinion was of the whole thing?
I don't know whether it's his own writing or somebody writing him about it. I think maybe Emmett Hughes might have written it, but it was to the fact that Eisenhower said the plane made one of its normal crash landings. He was using those words as any military man would, because it isn't a conventional landing when the U-2 comes down. But he definitely is saying that the Russians didn't shoot it down. But the best source on that is Dulles himself in the same month, in the May of 60, before the Foreign Relations Committee. Dulles says that in just plain words.
Our best judgment is that it did not happen as claimed by the Soviets. That is, we believe that it was not shot down at its operating altitude of around 70,000 feet by the Russians. We believe that it was initially forced down to a much lower altitude by some as yet undetermined mechanical malfunction. At that lower altitude, it was a sitting duck for Soviet defenses, whether fighter aircraft or ground-to-air fire or missiles. As to what happened at that lower altitude, We're not sure. The pilot may have bailed out at any time, or he may have crash landed.
You say that Khrushchev gives him a way out after the discovery. First of all, Khrushchev announces that they've caught, that they shot down a plane. He doesn't say anything else, an American plane. And then Dulles provides a cover story, which is readily disproved by the Russians because they had a whole bunch more information than what they...
They said it was gathering weather information or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, NASA was doing all the publicity. The CIA was out of the picture. It was supposed to be a NASA airplane, upper weather atmospheric checks.
And he says, in your book it says, the Russian premier was ready to say, "We are so close to the summit and to peace. I am ready to accept that this was a cruel and terrible provocation made by others without the knowledge of the American president. Let the president stand up and say that he had no knowledge of this flight, and then back up his statement by firing Allen Dulles, Dick Bissell, and those other 4 men who had pressed so hard for this flight." So I'm curious who those 4 men were, and had Allen Dulles and Dick Bissell really pressed so hard for that flight?
Well, I think in their position, they couldn't, it was their U-2. I mean, their flight had been approved. But what you had to have read earlier in there, and I'm sure you did, was that the order for no overflights was non-exclusive. In other words, nobody was authorized. I grounded all the planes I was using to fly over Asia, and we were flying in those days all the way from Taiwan up to Kokonor, and from Thailand up to Tibet, and we were just covering the area with a lot of airplanes. We just grounded them all. In fact, it probably cost us the Tibetan campaign because we were keeping the Kampas alive with food and medicine and weapons by dropping into their mountains all the time. We stopped, and they couldn't figure out what on earth had happened to us. Here we were supporting them and encouraging them to fight, and we stopped, which was a pretty bad thing to do. Well, all of a sudden, out of the clear, here comes a U-2 flight, which is an overflight. And just a short time before that, I had asked the Secretary of Defense to ask the White House for permission to fly over the Kampas with food and medicine. I said, we won't take any weapons, but the 4 guys need this. And the White House turned it down. So I knew the White House was emphasizing the fact, no overflight. Then this flight took off. Well, ostensibly, it's a CIA flight. You have to figure, since the only person in CIA that could authorize it in the final analysis is Allen Dulles. But Allen Dulles wasn't talking, so he was, and when he did talk before the Foreign Relations Committee, he said clearly, it wasn't shot down. In other words, Khrushchev is wrong. He's telling a lie. There's something else to it. And Allen Dulles was, and you can just read in the testimony how uncertain he was about the facts himself. So he was almost saying, I didn't know about that, and I wasn't sure about this. He's almost saying, I didn't send that plane out. He didn't say it that way, but if you read the transcript carefully, you get that meaning out of it.
Now, is what you're telling us here now, and Dulles' possible uncertainty about this, is this something that you have come to since writing this book? Because this paragraph sounds like Dulles and Bissell pressed so hard for this flight and 4 other people.
What I'm talking about there is not the specific flight. What I was told when I found out that they made a flight that I thought was prohibited by Eisenhower, that they must have pressed for it. What alternative was there? Later, I got a hold of a copy of the transcript, and I could see what was bothering them. And see, these transcripts don't come out immediately.
Right.
You get the things later. And what I knew from the U-2 contacts I had was that it wasn't a normal flight. And this business of getting it to be flown at all, I knew had to have been done without Eisenhower's permission, because, I'll say White House permission, because that's the people who turned me down with the planes over Asia. There's no overflights.
The U-2 could reach 90,000 feet, much higher than Soviet MiGs or SA-2 missiles could reach. Allen Dulles briefed Colonel Andrew Goodpaster, who was Eisenhower's intermediary to the CIA. Allen Dulles stated that we were unlikely to lose a U-2, and if we did, the pilot would not survive. We were told, and it was part of an understanding of the situation, that it was almost certain that the plane would disintegrate, and that we could take it as a certainty that no pilot could survive. It's possible Gary Powers did not use the ejection seat because he may have wondered if it would have blown him up as well. The NSA reported Powers had been tracked down to 30,000 feet, and then when turning back to Sverdlovsk, was intercepted. Soviet fighter chatter revealed a pilot reporting, "He's turning! He's turning!" Soviet pilot Igor Menchikov reported in 1996 that he flew in front of the U-2 at around 30,000 feet as wash from his Su-9 broke one of Powers' wings, causing him to slowly circle to the ground. This had previously happened to a U-2 plane in September of 1958 in a mishap with a Canadian F-86 in West Germany. It has also been suggested that a Soviet mole was responsible for the malfunction. KGB officer Viktor Shmenov claimed that someone leaked the flight plan ahead of time. Colonel Prouty's view was that the sabotage was American by design, and one of the reasons for Eisenhower's distrust of the military complex. Fletcher Prouty never did reveal the names of those 4 men.